So you really do want to think about how long do you have to be in the survivor mode? Is it suiting you, or do you have to kind of flip a switch and start getting into builder mode? A lot of times what happens is that people stay in survivor mode long after the threat has passed, and then it just continues to reinforce that this mindset of being smaller or more fearful than you need to be. And I think that's probably one of the greatest detriments of staying in it too long.
Hey, welcome, Dr. Gunner.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So today I have the pleasure of having Dr. Julie Gurner. She is a doctor of psychology and an executive performance coach with nearly a decade of experience coaching the top executives in tech and finance in the country. So, Dr. Gurner, first of all, thank you so much for coming on to one of my first episodes. I really, really appreciate you being here.
I'm so excited to be here. I love when people are kicking off new ventures, and I'm happy to support it.
So I've been following you for a while now on Twitter, especially, and I've been also reading a lot of your blog, Ultra Successful. And, I really resonate with how you frame things a lot. A lot of the times it's more of like a mind frame stuff. So today I wanted to dig into that a little bit where, topics that a lot of people might be able to relate to. One of the there's like patterns, I think, that in the world that show up over and over again. And one of these patterns that I've been really curious to ask you about is survivor mode and how a ton of people nowadays, at least it seems like they're in survivor mode, whether it's in business or their personal life. So did you have any thoughts on that?
That's such a great question. I don't think I've ever been asked that, and I think it's a really it's a really important question because there is a mindset in survivor mode of self-preservation, and that self-preservation really impacts every other decision that you make and how you behave. So things like, how you put yourself forward and act. If you're in survivor mode and you're at work or in your business, you probably have your head down. You're just kind of focused on doing the work. You're not really popping your head up and taking a lot of risks. How you invest your money, where the money that you have and how you allocate that might be very much in a scarcity kind of container. And so you really do want to think about how long do you have to be in the survivor mode? Is it suiting you, or do you have to kind of flip a switch and start getting into builder mode? A lot of times what happens is that people stay in survivor mode long after the threat has passed. And then it just continues to reinforce that this mindset of being smaller or more fearful than you need to be. And I think that's probably one of the greatest detriments of staying in it too long. And I think that's true personally as well. I like that you bring that into it too.
And what you said about like people getting stuck in it for a long time because they fear that something else is going to come around the corner, right? Or somehow their way of life and their viewpoints, what they have built is going to get taken away if they were to let go of their guards somehow.
Yeah, and I think that there is, you mentioned two things that are really important. One is that they'd have to like people feel like they have to let go of their guard. And I feel like some of the best builders are paranoid people. So I don't think you have to let down your guard entirely. I think it's good to have this kind of streak of paranoia. But what is detrimental is holding on to this sense of fear and scarcity. And that is really what keeps people stuck. And when you're sitting in it too long, what ends up happening is all these other decisions are made through the lens of surviving. So, you may not spend money in a way that actually is increasing your business. You may not ask the person out that you should ask out because maybe you've been rejected before and that really still hurts. There's a lot of ways in which you could have had, if we were to look back and be kind of a ghost looking back at our own life, you could have had those moments where if you had asked the person out, they might have said yes, and you might have had this great path forward. Or if you would have taken the chance to just spend a little extra on something that would help your business, or maybe take the chance doing something on social media where other people might see you, that pays off. And so you prevent success sometimes by staying in a place where you think it's safe. You're actually keeping yourself far smaller than you could be across multiple areas of life. And of course, to your point, I think that you do have to be in survivor mode to survive whatever it is the challenge is. Maybe it's a terrible breakup or a business that is really struggling. But when you get to the other side of it, there is a time to kind of flip that switch to builder mode, really tap into the internal resilience you have and start really, testing the waters a bit with small risks first.
Yeah, and the small bursts actually is a great point because it's kind of you stepping out of your bubble a little bit, gaining
Mm-hmm.
confidence and building that momentum to keep going and realizing that, hey, things are gonna be okay. A lot of life is about failing. You might try something and you touch the hot stove and you'll learn from that and don't try that again, maybe, but do something else.
You're right. And those small steps too are ways in which you can test the waters and feel really comfortable about it. So if you're coming out of something bad, you say, hey, I'm going to throw a little money behind ads and see how it goes. And, maybe it's only $10 or, whatever it is, but you get to kind of test things without having a catastrophic blowout and setting yourself up for something that could be really disheartening. And I think that that's where people sometimes go wrong is when they think about taking risks, they always think about like, oh, I have to do this big grand thing. And, you don't just sit on the couch watching Netflix and then decide I'm going to run a marathon tomorrow. Like that's a setup for a really bad situation. So you want to say, well, I'm going to see what it feels like to run like 1 minute and walk 30 seconds and run 1 minute and walk 30 seconds. And you test the waters. And if that feels like too much, you scale back. If it feels like, oh, I'm really comfortable, you scale forward. There's a lot of ways in which you can really adjust and adapt and make yourself stronger as you're building confidence and building wins. And it's a real path out of that survivor mindset. So I'm glad that you kind of mentioned some of those elements.
Yeah. And I think just hearing about the analogy about the marathon, I think it's also, from my perspective, important to define what your goals and success means to you in that case, right? Because
Yeah.
some days you might just not feel like going out and running, right? You might have made a promise to yourself that you're going to go and run X amount every week, right? But some days, the stress of life, stress of things around you, sometimes it gets to you. And success would have to be like long term, right? You have to redefine it and say, like, hey, maybe today it's a little too much. I might take a little bit of time. But over the long term, that's my goal is to run that marathon and improve.
Yeah, I think that we're on the same page where you have that long-term goal of running the marathon and you don't have to run every day to accomplish that goal. And I think we put sometimes undue pressure on ourselves that it means we have to be perfect and perform perfectly every day to be able to get to that level. There's a woman, her name is Candace something, it's escaping me, but she's run a number of ultra marathons. So, 50, 100-mile races. And they asked her how she trains. And she just has this very unconventional training method where she says, I just go out and run. And when I feel like running these like insane distances, she does. But she kind of calibrates to her body. And in doing so, really has been able to be incredibly successful in a way that other people probably wouldn't assume. They'd want her to be on this hyper strict training method and regimen. And it doesn't work that way for everyone. So I think you can't compare your journey to someone else's. For other people, maybe staying locked into a certain schedule is really good for them. And for you, maybe there are times when you just have to say, look, I need a day off today. But because of that day off, you gather some energy. And the next day, you're really excited to get back to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what you mentioned there about listening to your body, like how important is that for a lot of things? I mean, not just, an analogy with like survivor mode, but just like listening to it, taking a moment to, pause a little bit and realize, hey, what am I doing? Is the thing that I'm doing, like, is it actually, helping my body? Like, is it too stressed or whatnot? So,
I agree with you. I think that one of the things that we tend to do is we either outsource our body's metrics, like, we wearing smart watches and things like that, where we say, well, if our metrics look okay, then we're fine. But we stop listening to how we feel. You wake up and you haven't had a good night's sleep. You don't need a smartwatch to tell you that, like, you need to get your sleep straight. And that sleep is going to determine how you deal with stress. It's going to help to determine your mood. It's going to help to determine how well you make decisions the next day. We know all of those things, but it comes down to something really fundamental, like go to bed. have a regular sleep schedule. That seems very basic, but it's something almost everyone can do, and it pays dividends on the back end. So sometimes listening to your body and doing some basic things can have outsized rewards. And that's I think, a fantastic example of like just small things, eating when you're hungry, not taking care of yourself in some very basic ways. You don't have to be a triathlete to really listen to yourself and put yourself in a good position to be effective and feel good in your own body.
Yeah. And it's speaking of like taking care of yourself and listening to your body, little slightly differently. We've talked about survival mode when it comes to like coming out of something like a breakup or something where you're feeling down and putting your head down.
Mhm.
I would love to know your perspective about this, where I feel like there's also a survivor mode for people who do a lot, where if they feel like if they don't keep going, like they're gonna lose something. I don't know what it is, but it feels like they have to constantly be running that marathon and they can't take a day off. Even if their body's telling me, they'll be like, oh, I'm so tired and my body doesn't feel great, but they just can't stop. To me, it seems like there's also some kind of survivor mode going on there.
That's a really great observation. And I think it's true, is that there are some people that if they're not working every hour of the day, they almost punish themselves saying like, I'm not doing enough. I'm not taking on enough. I'm not like, and you see that sometimes in a couple of different categories. You see it from people who kind of come from nothing and have always had to, like the way they got out was to do that kind of work, not realizing sometimes that there's a point where you don't have to operate like that anymore. Like that may have been the method of work that got you from like zero or maybe below zero to being at a comfortable place today. But maybe now you're at a point where you don't have to be busy 24/7 in order to be incredibly productive, be effective, be successful, and be able to push things forward. But it is detaching like how you think about the value of your time, and also thinking about what is, when you're talking about filling every hour and doing that, there's almost a panic sometimes or an anxiety around that, and really addressing what is that anxiety or stressor that's keeping me filling every hour of my day and kind of overwhelmed. What am I linking to that? Does that mean that I'm doing everything possible so that I never go back to a place I don't want to go to? Does that mean that I'm optimally effective to me, even though that may be not true? And what you find are the beliefs that keep you stuck in that pattern are beliefs that you really should examine. And if you can do that and you start confronting them head on, you start giving yourself a little space without that work and see what happens. And it's going to feel strange. You're going to feel a little guilty. Maybe you'll even feel a little stress, but you start giving yourself, once you know cognitively, I think that's the first switch, is saying, why am I filling every hour? Really looking at the reasons you give yourself. Are these valid reasons? And then starting to challenge it by changing your behavior a bit, recognizing that those emotions are still going to be there. And you're going to have to work a little bit to get yourself to a point where you prove to yourself that taking 1 hour on a Friday evening to have dinner with your family or to do the things that you want to do, something fun, did not ruin the rest of the week. It did not put you actively behind, because you'll always find things to fill that space if you're looking for them. We have endless work. So you want to run that marathon, as we've talked about, and you can't do that if you are completely burned out. It actually is against the productivity that you seek.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like the way I think about it from like nature's perspective, like, the more energy you expend to do something is actually not good. You actually want to find ways to do less, right? Put in less effort, get more out of that effort, right? So you might want to delegate a task and just say, hey, my team's going to take care of this. And I just need to provide a little bit of input and spend some time with my family or something.
I think that the way in which I always speak with people that I work with is that I think that most of our lives, if you are ambitious or have certain work goals, you will have periods of intensity, but those periods are not forever. So you say, like, when you're first starting a company up, you can't say, well, I'm just going to take it easy. That just isn't going to work. But if you're already at a certain executive level, you will still need to have periods of intensity, maybe around a product release or something that's happening, but you won't have to have that same level all the time. Same with being a founder, same with being, CEO of any sort. you have these periods of intensity. And I think if you're unwilling to have those periods, you're not going to be able to get to a certain level. But I don't think that those periods have to be all the time. And I think that's where it gets really confusing for people.
Yeah, and just to tie this back to what you were saying before about like if someone's starting from nothing or below zero, negative, right? If you're a founder, you're an entrepreneur just starting from basically scratch, nothing, you built something and you've gotten to that point by having a certain mentality, it's hard to kind of let go of that control and trust that some person on your team, you built a good culture, focusing on that and realizing that, hey, you picked the right people. Like letting go of that control can be so hard. Do you find like this is a common blocker or patterns and within like a lot of executives and people who are, at those levels?
Yes, I think that the founder challenge is the one that you mentioned is really common, where they've built it to a certain level and they're still in everything and doing everything. And, I think the thing that starts to make that switch is to help people recognize that you can't scale like that. Like if you are doing everything, you will not grow. Your company will not be as large as you want it to be. You will be the limiter of your own business if you insist on operating in that way. You can't just have one pusher in the business. You have to have multiple pushers. And so you begin to have people who say, look, what got you to this point will not get you to the next level. And you have to learn new skills, operate in new ways, and, really kind of stretch yourself to trust and verify at first with some people around you, and then begin to hand them a little bit more and a little bit more. And before you know it, that's actually really relieving that you don't have to do it all and that you can start sitting and pulling into the things that you're great at. And instead of being able to do those things that you're great at only 10% of the time when you're first building your company, now you get to do it like 40% of the time or 50% of the time. And because of that, when you lean into those strengths that you have, the company itself moves in a way that is far more effective. You get to be more effective. Other people get to do the jobs that maybe you're mediocre at a high level, and everything moves. So it's really freeing, but you are the blocker. So you've got to take care of that.
Yeah, and I think with business especially, it's kind of like you're in a highly competitive, environment. You're constantly worried about like keeping your businesses afloat and being able to innovate and grow and stuff like that. And you can't have the pressure of every tiny details within your company on you,
Right.
it's just not going to ever, yeah, you're actually going to be a blocker for your company's success. Letting go of things is actually an art itself.
It is, because you have to know what to let go of and what details to still be aware of. I mean, like you can't be an effective founder if you don't know how much runway you have or have your hand on the pulse of the money that you have or the resources. You have to still be involved in the product and hopefully driving vision there. You have to be, leading the company in a really effective way where certain details, but other details you allow others to own. So it is really deciding like what are the most important things for me to know and to be a part of and to do, and what can other people do so that I can bring all of my energy more into maybe sales or partnerships or some of these other things that might be incredibly important. I'm with you 100% on that. I think that it's a skill. It's hard to navigate. It's a transition point for any kind of leader or founder. And it's one that when they make those transitions effectively, really help their business to scale.
Yeah, yeah. And like as we said at the beginning we were talking about like keeping your body healthy and
Yeah.
mindset and spending time with your family. It's like you're a valuable asset. Like you have to realize yourself as a valuable asset to your company, and as you would take care of any assets, right? You would have to take care of yourself. And we are social creatures. We need comfort of others, family, friends and stuff like that. So, and I wanted to tie this back into our next topic, which is gratitude, right? Having gratitude for having your family, or whatever you built so far, your teammates and stuff like that. Did you have any thoughts on that for?
Yeah, I think people are often hesitant to have gratitude around things because they think it makes them finished. Like, I'm grateful for it, so now I'm done. Like, and I think that it's not settling into this place of contentment, but it's just appreciating. And that appreciation, of how fortunate you are or what you've done or who you have in your life is very, very different. And in fact, often is a motivator to continue to build great things and to go forward. You don't want to lose all the wonderful things you have because you're unwilling to stop and recognize and be appreciative of, the gifts in your life and the people in your life and the wonderful things in your life or what you've been able to do. So, gratitude, I think, is hard for people because they see it as contentment, like, oh, it's going to take away all my drive if I stop and I appreciate this stuff. But it really isn't that. And if you deeply appreciate it, I mean, it's a motivator forever and ever to continue to build and to move. I guess that I see it, be sure that people aren't seeing it as a blocker to ambition, but oftentimes it's a lot of fuel.
Yeah, and you know, I think when I first started practicing gratitude, I started to notice a change and a shift in my mind where I wasn't anxious about everything, like this survivor uh,
Interesting.
mode, like it kind of started to disappear a little by little over time, where it was kind of like, okay, you know, maybe I don't have maybe certain things go bad, but at the end of the day, like I'm grateful to have the things in my life, like my family, friends, they're still there, they're
Yeah.
there as support, and those are things that are not necessarily going away. Like if I focus on, my efforts in that. Yeah. So I
So
don't.
say a little bit about how you practice gratitude because you talk about practicing, and
Yeah.
I think your listeners probably would be very interested in that.
Yeah, so I think when I first started, I just knew like from like research and stuff like that, that gratitude was helpful to get out of this depression or survivorship bias. And I didn't necessarily know where I was going with it, but I just kept on doing it. I just kept on doing it and doing it.
Amazing.
There were some times when I first started, it was kind of like, I don't know what to write about here. And then, I might just have one thing on there, and then I would write one thing and I would get stuck. And then I started to push myself to write 10 things, right? So just 10 of the smallest, simplest thing. Like I'm grateful that have the ability to walk, right?
Amazing.
I'm grateful that I have a healthy body with two arms and legs. I'm grateful that I'm in this country where there's opportunity. I'm grateful for my job. I'm grateful that I woke up today, right? I'm grateful that, I have clean drinking water, right?
Yeah.
So like these things, they're like almost became a safety for me. They became securities in my life. It's like I can take risks. And at the end of the day, if I still have these things in my life, like, it's still a good life.
I love that. I mean, I love the fact that you just grounded in all of these really fantastic things and they almost became like a platform to leap from. And it's such a powerful thing. And I also like the fact that you started doing it, didn't really feel like doing it, didn't really like doing it, and you just kept doing it. I mean, that's a real testimony to resilience. And I think too, it's a great message for people out there that like they may be like gritting their teeth and like, I have nothing to be grateful for, and I'm just going to write this down. But that over time, it's funny with positive psychology, we find that when people do that at night, they actually make a list like, hey, just list 3 things you're grateful for and how you contributed to them. Right. Like I'm grateful for the beautiful weather. And how did you contribute to the beautiful weather? Well, I didn't really contribute, but I went out and enjoyed it. And I went for a walk and it was wonderful and it made my mood better. If we can find even 3 things, I made someone smile today. I had a really great interaction with my pet, like just silly stuff even, but those things are grounding and they set us up for changing our perspective a little bit, changing our lens so that the world looks a little different. And when things look a little bit more positive or optimistic, we behave differently. We do different things. People respond to us differently. And so, I love the fact that you just were resilient. You did it anyway. You used it as a platform and it helped you to kind of move to the next level. And I hope others take that away from it because it's really a great message.
Yeah, I hope so too, because I think like I've definitely noticed like people who are against this whole gratitude journaling or writing things about gratitude, they definitely have what you said is like they think it's complacency, right? That if they started just being grateful for everything, they won't have any desire to do anything else. What you said is like a platform to jump off of. It's actually the exact opposite of what you think it is, because once you become grateful for the small, tiny things in your life, they're like keep you afloat. And it's like
Hmm.
there's some kind of a mentality I think all animals or humans have where we just want to achieve things like at the next level, right? We just want to keep going and going and going, see pushing ourselves.
I agree. I think it's a really fantastic way of looking at it. And I hope that people take that away, because the number one thing that I get as pushback sometimes is, well, I'm not done yet. Right. Like, and I'm like, well, it's not for when you're done. That's like an autobiography or maybe a biography that you want to write. But, along the way, when you start to look at the things that you've achieved, sometimes if you were to look back, what would an 18-year-old version of you actually think about what you've become, or the conversations that you have, or the people that you're connected to, or the job that you do, or the skills that you have? And a lot of times it's pretty impressive that that person would never have been able to anticipate that you had this great family or great person, or, all these wonderful things that you could have. And you start saying, well, if I could do that in 5 years or 10 years, and now I'm even more knowledgeable, and I'm more aware, and I know more about the ecosystem. I mean, there's a reason why, even though a lot of times we think about founders as being young, the most successful founders and people who are starting companies are in their 40s, right? I mean, statistically, they're in their 40s. So people can often feel behind because they're being compared to outliers, Zuckerberg, et cetera. Like, that isn't the common story, which is why he's so extraordinary and why he's an outlier. But for the majority of people who start successful businesses that do very well, they're in their 40s. And so for most people, they have time to get there. And even, people in their 50s are not necessarily doing that bad when it comes to statistically starting businesses, because they do have cumulative knowledge that they've brought from all their jobs and careers and interactions. And they are a lot of stability. They have things that they could lose. So they're not going to start businesses if they don't feel they can actually make good on it. And we see that we're just kind of comparing ourselves sometimes to the wrong metrics, social metrics, instead of like kind of actual metrics. And there's a challenge in that, I think, because people aren't showing you all of the bad things. They're showing you only the good stuff. And sometimes on social, oftentimes fake good stuff that isn't even real, and causes a lot of people to be upset when they're not meeting that mark.
Yeah, and it just definitely seems like younger generation is definitely more online, and it's definitely affecting their abilities to, at least from what I've read, it's like a lot of them are having tough times finding work, or, even coming out of their shells. They're more anti-social nowadays, stuff like that. Just because of the way they perceive, oh, everyone else has these great things. Like, what value do I have in this world? And
Yeah, you're right. I mean, like, thank God there was not a lot of social media when I was kind of coming through, college or graduate school. In graduate school, I was renting a very cheap place in a woman's attic. She was like a single mom renting out her attic for people to just basically crash in. And, nothing sexy about that, nothing exciting about that. It was one room, like a mattress on the floor, and just going to graduate school and trying to make ends meet, right? So not a fancy apartment with a balcony and a beautiful view, and 20 years old or whatever. But I think that people, there has to be a patience, but an impatience. Like, there's always this driver for the next thing that I think is the inherent impatient, which is good. But there has to be a patience for, you can't want rewards that you haven't yet earned, and understanding that you have to earn them, and no one's going to give them to you. You don't deserve them without kind of that trade of providing value and earning it. And while I think everyone has the right to, have heat and be warm and all of those lovely things, you're not going to get the $40,000 penthouse when you're 20 years old just for existing. You have to have something you're bringing to the table. And, I certainly wasn't bringing it to the table at that age, and that's okay. I think that we have a place that we eventually get to, and we just have to be strategic, look at our path, and find a way to get there. And that's hopefully people are setting that red dot in the sky and looking for paths to get where they want to go.
Yeah, and I think the way social media and a lot of YouTube even has skewed what success means. It's like
Yeah.
people feel like they have to achieve so much more. And as you said, like you can't reap the rewards of something you've not put efforts into, right? Like you don't know that person's journey to get there, right? Person has a penthouse, but you don't know what luck they had along the way, what other circumstances that you don't have knowledge of or access to resources that you have access to that that person might have had.
I think you have to also decide what is the reward, like what is it that you actually want? Like not everyone wants the penthouse.
Right.
Like not everyone wants the same things. And so, you might see a Rolls Royce that's $500,000, but like for some people, spending $500,000 on a car is probably not the thing that would make them the happiest, but maybe it's spending it, a fraction of that on a home, or it's, being able to go on this great vacation that's even a smaller fraction of that, or maybe it's being able to go to this great restaurant for a date night with their spouse, which is even a smaller fraction of that. But we can reward ourselves and we can also see ourselves as successful through a variety of things, but you have to determine for yourself what those are. Because if you're looking to the outside to set those marks for you, you're never going to hit them. I mean, like, so you have to say, like, hey, maybe that car is one of your goals. And if so, that's great. But there are like, you have to be the decider and not, strange person on social media. So I do think that we all have to set our own marks. And then when we hit them, they're so much more gratifying because they actually mean something to us. And that's a part of, I think, everyone's journey that becomes very happy in their life is they see the rewards that like I'll have clients who will tell me, like, I finally was able to buy that thing, a car I had pinned up in my bedroom as a young boy. Like, that's the coolest thing in the world when that happens. But for other people, I knew that I was excited when I was finally able to, take my wife to Paris for the very first time. And like, it's so gratifying and so fantastic when things like that happen. So I want us not to cut ourselves off from the things that really matter to us, just to post a picture, on social media.
It's interesting you bring up like, oh, I finally got that car or I took my wife out. And it's kind of like, to me, it's like working on your dreams and helping other people's with their dreams. It seems like that is the most rewarding thing that you can do and not necessarily chase wealth of what other people are chasing. Follow like what you're dreaming about and keep going towards that and help people close to you to achieve their dreams as well, because that they're going to be thankful that you were there to help, and that feels good because we're social creatures, right? We want to interact with other people, we want to be social. So yeah, that's very good.
I think that we need to be really cautious about who our circles are too. I mean, like there are people who don't want to improve themselves, people who are not, or who are skeptical, who are negative, who are pessimistic, and who are going to try to make you the same. And I do think that that's a really important part of it too, is being mindful of the people that do surround you. And, sometimes we outgrow our circles, or we need to like limit our contacts with people who are not really helping us move ahead, or who create doubt, or who are non-believers, or a bit toxic in that way. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that sometimes we put up with people who will, tell us why something won't work. And probably the best thing you can do is, if you're not able to kind of limit contact with those folks, is not to share the things that are really important to you and that are your dreams with people who aren't going to be those kind of cheerleaders in your life and really help you feel great about it.
Yeah, and I think like what you mentioned about like people being pessimistic, like you have to be optimistic if you want to achieve
Yeah.
dreams, right? Like it's a weird thing. It's like, oh, I want to be realistic, right? That's what people say. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, I don't like toxic positivity, let's say. It's like, well, but you got to be optimistic about the future. Like if you want to keep motivating yourself to achieve your dreams, you have to dream big, and you have to be optimistic about it as well.
I also think that they may be speaking the truth, that they want to be realistic, and maybe what they're talking about is realistic for them. It doesn't have to be realistic for you. And I think that people do see a lot of ceilings who will bump up against them repeatedly in their life. But I don't know anyone who's done anything big who has ever not been an optimist. I remember watching an old interview with Jeff Bezos around earlier days in Amazon. And he said, oh, he was talking with the interviewer, and the interviewer said, well, if you weren't doing Amazon, what would you be doing? And he said, I see myself one day going to space. And the whole audience laughs. They're like laughing. It's kind of almost like a ridicule. And he goes, no, like I see myself getting into this like spaceship and I'm going to go, do all these things. And people are laughing. And he goes, well, it takes a lot of resources and it's a very, very hard task, but he thinks it's possible. And then, 20 years later, literally 20 years later, he starts Blue Origin, takes a literal spaceship up into, kind of the upper ends of the Earth's atmosphere. And you see him getting off of that ship and he's so excited like a little boy. And, he has accomplished the thing that people ridiculed him earlier about, and now is talking about building infrastructure on space and all these things. And, no one is kind of laughing now. They're all asking more questions because they saw sometimes you have to pull off the miracle before other people see that you really do have the vision. You just have to be the first believer and the strongest believer, or nothing really will happen.
Yeah, and it's a great point where kind of like he had this amazing big dream, but he also probably realized that it's going to be difficult and it's going to take a long time, right?
Yeah.
And what all you can really do is just keep up with it, just take actions, which is one of the things I wanted to discuss to you about was planning versus actions. The people who are doubting him were probably like, oh, it's going to be too much. They're probably like thinking about all this planning stuff, which Jeff Bezos was probably like, let's just start doing. Let's just take it one step at a time. And I imagine like that's probably how he got to where he was.
Yeah, step by step, you do things and that you start the smaller steps first and you lay the groundwork. And, Blue Origin is in existence for a bit, but they kept building, figuring things out, planning. And I think that people wait for so much information before they even take the smallest steps. Whenever, the truth of it is you'll go faster if you just start and you'll figure things out as you go. But it's the mindset that you can figure things out as you go that puts you in that position. I think most people feel like they have to have it all figured out up front and then they're going to do something. And there's no way that big things happen that way. You can figure out the early steps. You can have an idea and kind of a hypothesis, but you're going to have to figure out a lot of things along the way and be comfortable with some of that uncertainty. And that's what I think makes being an entrepreneur so hard, is that you really live in a space of perpetual uncertainty and you've got to like figure this stuff out. And not everyone is built to figure that out, like to live in that kind of space. So all you can do is assume that you don't need as much information as maybe others would have and lower that threshold. So if everyone's waiting for 80% of the information before making a decision, maybe you start making decisions at 40 to 50% or lower it or whatever, depending on the importance of that situation. But you have to move more quickly. It's important.
Yeah, and I think that's very crucial for people, early entrepreneurs. The market moves so quickly, products move so quickly. You have to be able to be flexible. And if you're spending time planning in those early stages, it's kind of almost like being a little too confident that your plan is going to work, right? Think about the energy that you put into coming up with the plan. And then now you're in this position where it's like, we got to follow the plan. We got to follow the plan. And you're not being flexible. You're not
Good point.
You're not adapting.
Great point. No, that's an absolutely excellent point, because if you're not flexible on the plan forward, then you're not able to adapt when things do change. And that puts you in a position to fail and fail hard because you're not able to adjust and to move according to the landscape. And there are always going to be things you're not going to see when you're out there. And then when you are out there, if you just refuse to adjust, that's just how other competitors take you out, because they are willing and they do see what's happening. It's kind of like people who, prior to some of the AI stuff that we see today, if they say, hey, we're not going to use any AI, we're just going to do it in this one way, folks sometimes using AI are going to lap you, or engineers who are adopting AI practices are going to be much more productive. You're going to be kind of out competed by other people. And It's certainly not a place you want to be at. So I couldn't agree more that you want to have a pretty solid goal, but you want to be flexible in how you get there, with a vision and a definite idea, but with openness.
Yeah, and I think like a lot of engineering in the early stages is like you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And like let's just keep taking little steps at a time. Let's tweak something here, see what the effects of it are. It's kind of having that mindset of realizing, okay, there's a time to plan and there's a time to take action. And when you're in the early stages, like we gotta take as many actions as we can, keep chugging along, take the failures as they come, and then at some point you'll start making a plan. Like maybe if you're pitching to VCs or something, right? They want to see a plan because
Oh, sure.
they don't want to put their money at risk, right?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely want to compress your timelines as much as possible in the early stages of things. But if you don't have something that, if you're going to pitch a VC, whether it's pre-seed in the early stages, people still want to know that you know where you're going, how you're going to get there, or at least a theory, right? A hypothesis. And, if a VC agrees with your hypothesis, oftentimes that's like that's the money that you seek is right there. And they believe that you have a path forward and you have everything kind of squared away, your data room, and you do have early kind of actions moving forward. But you have to think about the fact who your audience is and the pace that's going to be expected of you. And that pace is going to be fast, especially if you're funded. You're going to have milestones that you're expected to hit, and you're going to have very limited, you're not going to have a long runway to do it. If you're like most companies, if you're exceptional, you may have a much longer one.
Yeah, and maybe it's just me, but I've noticed like with a lot of startups now or people getting into startups, they try to take that VC step first, where they're doing the pitch decks, like pitch and pitching to people. It's like, okay, where do we want to apply to? Let's apply to Y Combinator. We want to get our stuff ready. But it seems like the advice they usually give is like, hey, go and try first. It's almost opposite. Like people think like we should do this if we can get into Y Combinator or something like that. Oh, we're going to be set, right? We're going to be set. Product is just going to do well.
Well, Y Combinator is really interesting because they do have, fantastic advisors. You have great networks. They also take a piece of your company. I mean, there's a lot of like good stuff and bad stuff, but companies fail out of Y Combinator all the time as well. And I think people don't really focus on that. And there are plenty of companies that win who've never been to Y Combinator. So I do think that, accelerators can be fantastic for the right companies and the right people, but it doesn't mean that that is the only way forward. And oftentimes, depending on your company, it might not even be the best way forward. So I do think that, again, this is where thinking for yourself and understanding, how you want to proceed, because a lot of times people are looking for this huge exit. But what they don't understand is, oftentimes the founder equity is diluted so much that that huge exit that you're getting, maybe it's, I don't know, $200-300 million, is really the same amount of money in your pocket than if you would have had a, $40 million exit, but would have owned most of the company. So you really do have to think strategically and kind of how you want to move forward and what it will require of you.
Yeah, and thinking in terms of our next topic is like managing risks. So if you're like
Yeah.
thinking like strategically, like you have to manage that risk of it's like, okay, I'm going to take these steps, maybe go with this VC versus that one, and it's kind of like, you're taking a risk. And so how do you think like is there a good strategy out there at all for like managing risk, or is it just like you kind of have to have some kind of intuition?
I do think that you have to think about at least and really spend time thinking about like downside risk and upside risk, right? Like you want to think about how do you manage what you have to lose, for those who aren't as familiar with those terms, and how do you manage like and think about what you have to gain, and how do you really balance those out, and how does one impact the other? So like really basic terms, you think about something like, sometimes you'll speak with people who never want to put themselves on social media, right? Oh, they may make fun of me. I have nothing to say. But like, okay, yeah, that's the downside risk, right? Someone might make fun of you, etc. Upside, though, is that, hey, you might have able to connect to great people, have great job opportunities, be able to network with some folks that will give you capital or VCs. Like you have the upside there completely is worth the downside risk of ridicule. But if it's something like, you know, hey, I want to invest all of my retirement savings in this new venture. Well, the downside risk is pretty high, and the upside might be high if, so there's kind of like a different equation going on there. I think that when we start looking at like, what do we really have to lose versus what do we have to gain in very simple terms, and you force yourself to go through that exercise and you check yourself, like, hey, I'm thinking about this. And it's not just you. You can check yourself with someone you trust. Maybe it's your best friend, maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's another person. But like you kind of check yourself around those things and you get some valuable feedback from those who you do trust, like obviously not just strangers, internet, people who've never done it, etc. Because sometimes people inflate risks when they've never seen them. Like, if you're the first person to be an entrepreneur in your family, that's going to seem like risk no matter what you do. If you are not that person, and let's say your mom or dad owns a business, I mean, that's really going to change how they view that. So that's why I say, you have to be cautious who you ask and who you tap for information, but you also don't want people who are just yes people. If people are going to give it to you straight and be candid with you. But I think thinking through the upside and downside risks are incredibly important, and your upside potential rather than and downside risk, and being really candid and honest about those things. And sometimes that means you have to make some adjustments, and that's okay.
Yeah, and I think this kind of goes back to the gratitude part of it, where it's like you have to establish some kind of like a launching pad so that when you
Yeah.
get low risk, it's like, okay, you're not crashing and burning all the way down, right? You have a
Right.
platform or some kind of baseline where you can come back to, and it's like, I took this risk, but I'm just back to where I am, and just kind of setting the expectations that, hey, this could completely fail, but I have all the security that in my life that I can fall back on.
I think it's also, making sure that you plan for things like, there's one person I can think of who was like, look, I'm going to take, $20,000 of, my savings or my retirement, and I'm going to invest in this. But if it gets down to like two and I'm not seeing any returns, then I'm going to start looking for a job. Right. Like, oh, there's of these like built-in mechanisms where, they kind of have these trigger points where they understand where their risk tolerance is, how to think about that and manage that risk moving ahead. And then it also gives you something as that money is kind of going down to think, I got to kick it in gear. Like, it's motivation. I have to make this happen. And you can at least give yourself the satisfaction of giving it a shot. I do think once you know what the risks are, you have the opportunity to manage them in a really effective way.
And I think you also have to be selective about where you take risks, right?
Absolutely.
It's just like having extreme patience and saying, like, I don't have to go for everything that comes my way. I don't have to go
Right.
for every opportunity that comes my way. Let's examine what is the probability of this opportunity going well versus another one, right? And we have to be very selective with that.
I think early on, people make a lot of those mistakes, and just because they can do something doesn't
Yeah.
mean they should. So I do think that people like, they get these opportunities to do certain things and they get so excited that they have any opportunity at all that they'll grab at it. And that's not always the right way to go. Sometimes you just take everything. Other times, you're at a place where that thing can prevent you from taking the better opportunity that comes along and having the bandwidth to do it.
Well, so I don't want to take up all your time of your day. I could keep going about this. But I just I want to kind of close out there. I think we that was a lot of great stuff that we covered, and it definitely, when you're someone who's starting entrepreneurship, like a lot of these psychological things that impact our decisions, I think we have to be very much aware.
I couldn't agree more. I think that there is a lot more success found with intentionality and being aware of how you're thinking about things, what you're focusing on, and how you're directing yourself. And I hope everyone can kind of pull that from our conversation today and try to use some of those things for themselves to help them get to the next level.
Thank you so much for coming on here. I really, really appreciate it. It means a lot. And I think a lot of people will get a lot of valuable information from here, from this interview. So thank
I
you.
hope so.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Ravi. It was wonderful to have our conversation today.
yeah, it was excellent. Awesome speaking with you. I've been looking forward to it for a while now. So thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to speaking with you again sometime in the future. I, join some whatever you're working on. So I'll keep track. I'll keep track and find ways to connect again in the future.
Please do. And if people want to find me, I hope they can do so through the newsletter at Ultra Successful on Substack or on Twitter at Dr. Gurner.
I will be putting those in the description. Thank you so much. Have a great one.
Thank you. Take care.